We're picking this back up with his friend that was rowdy.
This boy named Johnny Yon, he liked to play with snakes. And there was a place where there were really a lot of snakes. And I don't know what kind of snakes they are. Obviously they were harmless, but we caught several snakes in a box and took them to school. And there was what was called a coat room in the back of the school. The schoolroom was not open to the outside. You went through a room that I think they would call it a foyer now. But we put these snakes in there, and he probably opened the box. But anyway, one day during that school day, the girls and kids started screaming, and there were snakes crawling around inside the school.
Wow.
Another time, I remember there was a dead deer that was really close to where we lived, and the only mark on it was its tongue. It had been shot in the tongue and apparently bled to death through its tongue as it was running. I guess that's not especially. But deer hunting was really a major project back in that part of the country. And we were about 120 miles from Pittsburgh, and one of my uncles would have, then like this was almost, must have been before hotels, but a lot of people would come and stay with my aunt and uncle, and they would cook for them, and they would stay there while they were deer hunting. My grandmother died when I was 12. In fact, I think it was on Mother's Day when she died. But then I went to Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and stayed with my dad for about a year when I was in the 5th grade. And although I'd considered myself somewhat backward back at the country school, it seemed like I could do pretty well in the city school. And so anyway, I went to school there for a while in Aliquippa. And then I don't really know what the conditions were, but my mother was a nurse housekeeper in a wealthy home, and she got permission for me to move in with her. And those were pretty good days. We had a nice school, and I was one of the bigger kids, and we had a
6th grade? Was this
yeah,
about
6th grade, and we had a 6-man football team. There was a center and 2 ends and 3 people in the backfield, and that was a football team. And I remember I was maybe pretty good, but I was pretty big. And so my mother ultimately got married, and she moved to Phoenix, Arizona. The man she married had some sinus problems and was of the opinion that a drier climate would help his health. So I went back and stayed with my dad and went to the 8th grade staying with my dad. And I remember wrestling and doing things, and actually I thought I was going to be a pretty good football player. Well then, after the 8th grade school was out, I flew on an airplane, and it was a Trans World Airlines Constellation, and it had 4 engines. They were piston-driven engines, and I don't know how often they overhauled them, but I know they did. I think jet engines now run forever, but then the piston engines had to be overhauled. And I remember them talking about this plane, and they said that those planes cost $18 million a dozen. In other words, $1.5 million for an airplane. And I don't know what an airplane costs now, but I think it's about $50 million for a normal jet plane. But now they, and then the airplanes, I remember going by Pikes Peak and talking about it particularly, and we were about even with it.
Oh, I didn't fly that high.
and so I think those piston-driven airplanes were probably limited at 14 or 15,000 feet. And I don't know what the limit is now, but I think the ideal flying height now is about 33,000 feet. And I think almost all planes do that. So moved out to Phoenix, and I ran quite a bit. And I remember,
Tell the story about when you first landed and what it felt like.
yeah, I remember quite vividly when we left Pittsburgh Airport, or I got on, and it was cold and raining. And I think I remember that airline ticket cost $212. At that time, the minimum wage was 60 cents an hour, and right now it's $7.50 and going up pretty soon. But so that was a very expensive airplane ticket, and it was cold and rainy. And the plane landed in Chicago, and I actually got off the plane in Chicago, and it was so hot there in Chicago, maybe the hottest weather I had been in. So we landed in Phoenix on June 6th, 1952, I think. It might have been 1951. It was 1951, June 6, 1951.
Because you were 14.
Yeah. And I remember and of course, then you just got off the plane on a portable stairway. And as I got near that, I was afraid to get off because it reminded me of when I used to open a furnace door to put coal in, and it was that hot. It was like fire. And I think I remember it was 106 that day. And of course, cars were not air conditioned, so that was pretty interesting. And I believe I remember seeing a sign that said, City of Phoenix, population 55,000. And I really wonder if I remember that accurately, because it seems that more likely it was 155,000. But in any case, I do remember that sign, and I remember it being so hot.
But it wasn't long and you adapted to it over time.
I got to where I was actually running, and one time I went to where my stepdad was working, and he said, "How'd you get here?" I said, "I ran," and he was upset that I had been running in that weather. So I met some friends, and across the street from us there was a girl, maybe just about a year younger than me, and she was really beautiful. Her name was Vicki Manning, and I was really starstruck with her. But you know, I don't remember that much. We used to hang out together some. And years later, when I was single, I saw her again, and we actually went out. And immediately I thought, I got to leave her alone, because if I hang around her, I'm going to end up getting married, and I sure didn't want to get married at that time. So we only went out together one time after I was single, and at this time I was like 40 or 41 years old when I had seen her again. She had been married and her husband had died, but she was still beautiful, and I was still infatuated, but it never amounted to anything. So when football season came, I had never handled a football in my life, but I remember my weight was 192, and there weren't that many kids that were faster than me, as I remember. And so I thought I was a pretty good football player.
9th grade.
Yeah, and I just played on the line. I mostly played in the center of the line on defense and played tackle on offense. And we had a pretty good football team, and as a freshman, I think we only lost one game. And so then basketball season came along, and I tried out, and I'd never played basketball at all, but I can really remember that when they posted a list of who was going to be on the basketball team, my name was not on it. I thought it must have been some mistake. Now that I know it was because I was not a very good basketball player. But then I had a job working in a service station, and it was kind of a service station that did a lot of truck tire repair. And we did not have a power wrench. we did everything by hand. And the thing you loosened and tightened these nuts with on the big truck tires was like a hammer, and it was a contained hammer, but it would deliver blows to the lug nuts, and you would either get them loose or tight. Now, of course, everybody, I mean, I even have an impact wrench at home now. But when I turned 16 then, I got a job in a grocery store. And I got a job in a grocery store just as the minimum wage turned from 60 cents an hour to 75 cents an hour. And I don't remember if it was because I was too ugly or too clumsy or what, but I was not a carryout boy for very long. I got transferred to the produce department. I believe, actually, really, I believe the reason it was because I was pretty strong. And potatoes came in 100-pound sacks then. And I believe cabbage crates weighed 120 pounds. So I worked in that produce department for quite a while. I remember I got a raise almost immediately when I got there, from 75 cents an hour to 85 cents an hour. And over just a period of years, I got to the point that I was making $1.65 an hour in the produce department.
And that was a good wage for the time.
It'd be like about $20
It was
an
the
hour
same
now.
that the produce manager was making, except he got 1% of the profits. And so I kept things going at night and wrote the orders, and I was like the night produce manager for probably 2 years before I graduated from high school. And like I said, I got to $1.65 an hour. People used to come in there, and I remember one of the guys, in fact the assistant manager of the produce department, who worked days along with the manager, Bill Nix, Adam Acuna, used to talk about, boy, that guy works for that power company and they do well. And I decided that when I graduated from high school, it would be a good job to go to work for the power company. And I went down and applied and was interviewed by a guy named Jack Wright, and I believe I went back every week for a while.
And checked to see if the job was open, or?
Yeah, went back and reminded him I wanted a job, and I remember, I think he got sick of seeing me, and he said, you're going to get an interview when there's the next opening. And I got an interview with a man named Grover Hughes in Substation Construction. And he hired me immediately. And I think he really liked me, and I really liked Grover Hughes. He was just such a great guy. In that department, it was building substations, which involved putting up steel towers, sometimes wood towers, and often digging ditches to put in conduit or ground wires. And we rarely would get a backhoe. We would almost always dig ditches by hand. The only power tool we actually had was a winch on the back of a truck. We had a boom, which was totally mechanical. It would probably go up in the air for 18 or 19 feet, and you could move things around with this winch line. When we built up towers, we would actually put up a piece of pipe, and then with a hand line pull up pieces of towers, and just gradually built the tower up to, I think some of those towers were as high as 75 or 80 feet. But I only worked on the ground, and I was called a electrical helper. Well, in 2 years, I began taking the electrical engineering course through a correspondence school and worked pretty hard. And I was fortunate that I got an electrician apprenticeship really early in that time frame.
About when did you move out from living with your folks during this time period?
I got married. You didn't tell about getting married, did you?
Well, no, we want to. Well, the other thing I think is important to mention is that you paid rent. Why don't you tell me?
Yeah,
I think that's an important thing.
While I was in high school, I paid $20 a week room and board.
20 a week?
20 a week. That's pretty significant.
$300.
I mean, I was making $1.60.
Oh yeah, that's a chunk.
Well, and I don't know when that started really, but when I graduated from high school, I was making $1.65 an hour. But then, and when I started for the power company, it was at $1.60 an hour.
And so you paid rent for probably 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
And didn't you say that your mom saved that money? Or some of it, or whatever?
I don't know.
Well, at one time you mentioned that she was able to live more comfortably because of that
Probably.
money that you said.
But I know that after I went to work for the power company, and I started in the power company in September after I had been out of high school for 3 months. And the next February I got married. And I did some out of town work in there in the meantime. And I remember when I got married, my wife and I moved into a house and our rent was $47.50 a month.
That was cheaper than living.
It was a lot cheaper than home.
Of course, they had to have their food.
My wife's aunt lived next door, and the day we got, the night after we got married, she came over in the morning and I was cooking breakfast. And I remember her saying, if you start cooking breakfast now, you're going to be doing it the rest of your life. And I guess that's kind of true.
Has been true.
So anyway,
You got that apprenticeship, you were saying, quite early.
I got an apprenticeship quite early. There was, in fact, I don't think there was any other young man who got an apprenticeship after only 2 years of seniority. But I did, and I graduated. And I remember especially, I was being interviewed, and they wanted to name somebody outstanding apprentice, and I guess they were going to name me, and they told me what I had to give a speech, and I said, I'm not going to do that. I don't want that. I'm not going to talk in front of people. So anyway, I didn't, and that went on and fine. But I got a job in a place called Centralized Maintenance, and this crew, what they did, they went out to power plants and did overhauls, and one of them there were some diesel engines and smaller generators, and they would go out and overhaul them, but also they would overhaul the larger units in like 175 megawatt gas plant. But at that time, the Four Corners Power Plant was starting up in New Mexico, and so I was sent up there in May of 1963, and I liked it there, and I think they liked me. In any case, I went to Farmington, New Mexico in August 20th of 1963 as a journeyman electrician. And there were 2 units there, 2 175 megawatt coal-fired generating units. And soon, in fact, the following year, they built another 225 megawatt coal-fired power plant. And so I enjoyed that job very much for the next few years. And then about 1969, they began building 2 very large coal-fired power plants. As things began to expand, then I became a foreman, and my job was the electrical and instrumentation in the power plant. And as the power plant expanded, it became quite a chore, and I can't remember, but I was really looking to hire electricians, and I hired several. I think we get up to as many as 8. And so as people started having ideas about how to do things better, they formed a planning department, And I ultimately, in a few years, became supervisor of that department. And our job was to supervise the contractors, get all the material, and determine what the crews in the power plant were going to do. So I did that for several years, and I remember there were some relatively bad feelings with operations, and it seemed like the operations supervisor was mad a lot of the time. I remember his name was Ken McAdams, and the opportunity came to take his job, and for some strange reason I did. I applied for that job and was awarded it, and so I was operations supervisor of units 1, 2, and 3 for many years. We had an operations crew of about 125 people, and I had 5 shift supervisors and 10 foremen that were reporting to me, and of course then they each had a crew that we staffed the plant around the clock and always. And so that's what I did for quite a long time.
Tell about your children.
During this, well, I had a son named James,
Tell about your mother-in-law.
and I remember for some reason James was expected to be a girl. I remember my mother-in-law, right after he was born, she said, "I'm glad my daughter's all right, even if it is a boy." And then 15 months later, we had another boy. In the meantime, my stepdad had the idea that we could save money if we moved in together.
Oh.
So
Money saver.
we lived together for a few years.
Really?
And
I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, we did that.
Basically in the house that you had purchased?
No, my stepdad's house. And my
Okay,
mom's
so
house.
what did you do? Did you rent your house that you had bought? Because you had.
I never bought a house.
You were just renting. You were
Yeah,
renting.
till then.
And so you moved
Uh-huh.
back in with them, lived with them for a while.
And that, I don't know if that didn't work out, but then we rented a while, and then we actually bought a house, and I think I remember the price of the house was about $12,000, I think, and the monthly payment was a little over $90. And that would have been about in 1961, I think, when that happened. But then, of course, in August of 1963, we moved to Farmington, New Mexico. Remember, I was kind of happy.
10 seconds.